I only ordered for family. My mother-in-law smiled when my aunt asked why I got no steak or dessert. Am I family or not? I asked my husband. Don't do this, not here, and keep your mouth shut. My mom knows what's best for all of us, he muttered, still chewing his food while everyone watched. Father-in-law cleared his throat and looked away uncomfortably. Sister-in-law, oh gosh, we just had hear it. But the table fell silent when I said what no one expected. My name is Penny, and after what happened at that dinner 6 months ago, my entire life changed. I need to get this out because people deserve to know what really happened that night, and how sometimes the most devastating truths come wrapped in the most innocent questions. Let me start from the beginning. I married Michael 3 years ago, thinking I was joining a loving family. His mother, Viola, seemed welcoming enough during our engagement, though there were always little comments here and there that made me uncomfortable. Oh, Penny, are you sure you want to wear that dress? It's a bit bold for our family gatherings. Or Michael's ex-girlfriend Jennifer always brought homemade desserts. She was such a thoughtful girl. But I pushed through it. Michael assured me his mother just needed time to warm up to me, that she was protective of her family. His father Robert was quieter, more reserved, but generally pleasant. His sister Jessica was closer to my age and I hoped we'd become friends, but she always seemed to maintain a careful distance, as if getting too close to me might displease Viola. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but love makes you blind to so many red flags. Michael had this habit of always deferring to his mother's opinions. When we were planning our wedding, Viola would make suggestions that were really demands in disguise. I think ivory would be better than white for your dress, don't you? It's more classic. When I mentioned I preferred white, Michael immediately sided with his mother. Mom has great taste, Penny. Maybe we should consider ivory. It started small, but it never stopped. Our honeymoon destination, our first apartment, even the furniture we bought, everything had to meet Viola's approval first. And Michael never, not once, stood up for my preferences when they conflicted with his mother's wishes. The dynamic in their family was suffocating. Viola ruled everything with a smile and passive-aggressive comments. Robert had learned long ago to just nod and agree to keep the peace. Jessica followed her mother's lead in everything, terrified of being the target of Viola's disapproval. And Michael, my husband, had never learned to set boundaries with a woman who'd controlled every aspect of his life. But I thought things would change after we got married. I thought Michael would prioritize our marriage, our new family unit. I was wrong. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Saturday evening in March. My Aunt Linda was visiting from Seattle. She's my mother's sister and practically raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 16. Linda is direct, no nonsense, and has never been afraid to speak her mind. She's also incredibly observant and protective of me. Viola had suggested we all meet at Romano's, this upscale Italian restaurant downtown. It'll be perfect, she'd said. A nice family dinner to meet Penny's aunt. I was actually excited. Maybe this would be the breakthrough moment where Viola would finally accept me as part of the family, especially with Linda there to see how loving and welcoming Michael's family could be. We arrived at Romano's right on time. The restaurant was busy, filled with the Saturday evening crowd. Our table was in the center of the dining room, which should have been my first clue that Viola had chosen it deliberately. She always preferred being seen, being the center of attention. Linda and I arrived together, and I introduced her to everyone. Viola was all smiles and charm, gushing about how wonderful it was to finally meet my family. Robert shook Linda's hand politely. Jessica gave her usual polite but distant smile. Michael seemed nervous, which I attributed to wanting to make a good impression on Linda. We settled into our seats, and that's when I noticed the place settings. There were only 5 sets of silverware and napkins. 5, when there were 6 of us at the table. Excuse me, I called to our server, a young man named Jason. I think we're missing a place setting. Viola quickly interjected with a bright smile. Oh no dear, everything's correct. I handled the reservations and ordering when I called ahead. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach, but I tried to push it away. Maybe she'd ordered family-style portions, or maybe there was some misunderstanding. Linda was telling everyone about her flight from Seattle, sharing some funny story about the passenger next to her who tried to bring a live chicken on the plane as an emotional support animal. Everyone was laughing, the mood was light, and I started to relax. Then the food began arriving. Jason brought out 5 plates. 5 beautiful, perfectly prepared steak dinners with roasted potatoes and asparagus. The steaks looked incredible, cooked to perfection, with this amazing herb butter melting on top. The portions were generous, clearly high-quality cuts of meat. 5 plates. 5 steaks. I sat there staring as everyone else received their meals. Linda looked confused, glancing between the empty space in front of me and the feast in front of everyone else. Excuse me, Linda said to Jason, who was walking away. I think you forgot 1 plate. Jason looked back at our table, counting the plates he delivered, then checking his notes. "No, ma'am, I have 5 steaks for 5 people. That's what was ordered." Viola cut into her steak with deliberate precision, not looking up. "That's correct. I only ordered for family." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the table, everyone froze. Robert stopped chewing and stared at his plate. Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Michael continued cutting his steak, but his movements became mechanical, robotic. Linda's voice was deadly quiet when she spoke. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Viola looked up with that same serene smile she always wore when delivering her most cutting remarks. "I said I only ordered for family. When I made the reservation and placed the order, I counted family members." The silence stretched on. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and hurt. Around us, other diners were beginning to notice the tension at our table. A woman at the table next to us was openly staring. Linda's eyes narrowed. "And Penny isn't family?" "Well," Viola said, cutting another piece of steak, "Penny is Michael's wife, of course. But when it comes to family decisions, family traditions, family matters. I've always handled things for my children and my husband. I know what's best for all of us." My hands were shaking. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of trying to fit in, trying to win this woman's approval, and this was what I got. Public humiliation in front of my aunt, the woman who'd been more of a mother to me than anyone since I lost my parents. I looked at Michael, my husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me. Am I family or not? Michael finally looked up from his plate, but instead of the support I desperately needed, I saw annoyance in his eyes. Annoyance at me, not at his mother. "Don't do this, Penny. Not here. Keep your mouth shut. My mom knows what's best for all of us." He said it while still chewing his steak. While everyone at the table, including my aunt, watched him dismiss and humiliate his own wife. His words were quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably and looked away, studying the restaurant's artwork as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He couldn't even make eye contact with me. Jessica set down her fork with a small sigh. "Oh gosh, do we really have to hear this drama right now?" The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. Not sympathy for the awkward situation, not embarrassment at her mother's behavior, but irritation that I might dare to speak up about being excluded and humiliated. I sat there looking around the table at these people who were supposed to be my family. Viola continued eating with obvious satisfaction, pleased with how thoroughly she'd put me in my place. Robert studied the walls like a coward. Jessica acted like I was the problem for daring to feel hurt. And Michael? Michael kept eating the steak that his mother had specifically ordered while ensuring I got nothing. The restaurant buzzed around us, other families enjoying their Saturday evening meals, completely oblivious to the small act of cruelty playing out at our table. I could smell the delicious aroma of the steaks I wasn't allowed to have, could see the happiness on other diners' faces as they shared meals and conversation and laughter. Linda was staring at me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I could see the anger building in her eyes, the protective instinct that had helped her raise me kicking into high gear. But she was holding back, letting me handle this my own way. That's when I realized something crucial. I had been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't whether I was family to them. The question was whether they deserved to be family to me. I looked around the table one more time, at each face, memorizing this moment. Then I smiled, not Viola's fake, calculated smile, but a real one. The smile of someone who had just figured out exactly what she needed to do. "You're absolutely right, Viola," I said clearly. "You do know what's best for your family." Viola looked pleased, probably thinking she'd finally succeeded in completely breaking me down. "And that's exactly why I'm going to make this very easy for all of you," I continued. "You won't have to worry about including me in family decisions anymore." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to a contact I'd hoped I'd never need to call. Floyd Brennan, the divorce attorney Linda had recommended months ago when I'd first started having doubts about my marriage, though I'd never admitted to her how bad things had gotten. I started typing a text message right there at the table, my fingers moving steadily across the screen. "Hi Mr. Brennan, this is Penny Chen. We spoke a few months ago about a consultation. I'm ready to move forward with divorce proceedings. Can we meet first thing Monday morning? I'll bring all necessary documents." The table went completely silent as they watched me type. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. I hit send and put my phone back in my purse. My lawyer will be in touch Monday morning to discuss the fastest possible timeline for divorce proceedings. I hung up and put my phone back in my purse. Viola's smile had vanished. Jessica's mouth was hanging open. Robert was now staring directly at me with something that might have been panic. Michael had stopped chewing entirely, his fork suspended in midair. "Penny," Michael said slowly, "what are you doing?" "I'm taking your mother's advice," I replied calmly. She's absolutely right that she knows what's best for her family. And what's best for her family is for me not to be in it. You can't be serious, Jessica breathed. Oh, I'm completely serious. I reached into my purse again and pulled out my wedding ring, the ring I'd quietly slipped off my finger while pretending to look for my phone. I placed it gently on the table next to Michael's plate. I won't be needing this anymore. Viola found her voice first, though it came out as more of a screech than her usual controlled tone. You're being ridiculous. You can't end a marriage over a dinner misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Linda spoke for the first time since the food had arrived, her voice dangerously quiet. You deliberately excluded your son's wife from a family dinner and then announced to a table full of people that she's not family. There's no misunderstanding here. This is between family members, Viola snapped at Linda. You're right, Linda replied smoothly. And Penny is my family. The only family she has left, since her husband just chose his mother over his wife in the most public way possible. Michael was starting to look panicked. Penny, please, we can talk about this at home. Don't make a scene. A scene? I laughed, and it felt good. Liberating. Michael, your mother just made sure everyone in this restaurant knows that after 3 years of marriage, I'm still not considered family. Your sister thinks I should shut up and accept being treated like garbage. Your father can't even look at me because he knows how wrong this is but won't speak up. And you, my husband, told me to keep my mouth shut while your mother humiliates me. I stood up from the table, and Linda immediately stood with me. The scene was already made, I continued. I'm just deciding how it ends. Viola was looking around frantically, clearly realizing that other diners were now openly watching our table. Her perfect public image was crumbling, and she had no idea how to regain control. Sit down, she hissed. People are staring. Good, I replied. Let them stare. Let them see exactly what kind of family you run here. Robert finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. Penny, maybe we can order you a meal now. It's too late for that, Robert. 3 years too late. Michael grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. Penny, stop. We can fix this. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back at his face. You know what, Michael? You had the chance to fix this every single day for 3 years. Every time your mother made a cutting comment, every time she excluded me, every time she made it clear I wasn't good enough, you could have fixed it then. You chose not to. I gently pulled my wrist free. And you made your choice tonight too. When I asked if I was family, you had the chance to say yes, she's my wife and she's absolutely family. Instead, you told me to shut up so your mother could continue making that decision for you. You're overreacting, Jessica interjected. It's just dinner. I turned to look at her. Jessica, let me ask you something. If you get married someday, and your husband's family deliberately excluded you from a family meal, announced in public that you're not really family, and then your husband told you to shut up about it, would that be just dinner to you? Jessica opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time all evening, she seemed to actually think about what had happened from my perspective. That's what I thought, I said softly. Linda put her arm around me. Come on, honey. Let's go get you some real food with people who actually care about you. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Viola's voice rising behind us. Michael, go after her. Fix this. You can't let her ruin our family. I didn't turn around to see if he followed us. I already knew he wouldn't. Linda and I went to a small diner about 10 blocks away. I ordered a cheeseburger and fries, comfort food that actually comforted me, unlike the fancy steak dinner I'd been excluded from. While we ate, Linda listened as I told her everything, all the small humiliations, all the times Michael had chosen his mother over me, all the ways I'd been made to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. I'm proud of you, she said when I finished. That took real courage. I should have done it years ago. Maybe. But you did it when you were ready, and that's what matters. My phone buzzed constantly throughout dinner, texts from Michael, missed calls, voicemails I didn't listen to. Linda watched me decline call after call. Aren't you curious what he's saying? She asked. I can imagine. He's sorry, he didn't realize how bad it was, his mother didn't mean it that way, we can work it out, I'm overreacting. I took a bite of my burger. Am I wrong? Linda smiled grimly. Probably not. When I finally listened to the voicemails later that night, I was right. Every single message followed the same pattern, minimizing what had happened, making excuses for Viola, promising things would change while making it clear that the real problem was my reaction, not their behavior. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and realizations. I stayed at Linda's hotel for the weekend and she extended her trip by a week to help me process everything that had happened. We spent hours talking through not just that awful dinner, but the entire 3-year pattern of behavior I'd been enduring. Tell me about the wedding planning again, Linda said as we sat in her hotel room Sunday morning. I remember you mentioning some issues, but I didn't realize how bad it was. So I told her everything. How Viola had insisted on approving every vendor, every decision, every detail. How she changed our flower arrangements without asking because roses are so much more classic than peonies. How she'd invited 30 of her own friends to our wedding while telling me I had to cut my guest list because the venue has limited capacity. How she'd given a speech at the reception about how lucky I was to be joining their family, making it sound like Michael was doing me an enormous favor. And Michael went along with all of this? Linda asked, though she already knew the answer. Every single time. He said his mom was just excited, that she meant well, that it was easier to let her have her way than to cause family drama. I laughed bitterly. Apparently the only drama that mattered was drama that might upset Viola. My feelings never factored into the equation. Linda had found a furnished month-to-month rental apartment just 2 blocks from mine. I'm taking a sabbatical from work, she announced when I protested that she didn't need to stay. I have plenty of saved vacation time, and I can work remotely when needed. You're not going through this alone. What do you mean? Remember when I visited 6 months before the wedding? I offered to help with the planning, and Viola made it very clear that outside help wasn't needed. She actually told me that she had everything under control and that too many opinions would just confuse things. I felt a chill. She never told me you offered to help. I figured as much. And when I asked you privately if there was anything I could do, you said Viola had everything handled and seemed to have very specific ideas about how things should be done. Because that's what Michael told me you'd said. We stared at each other as the implications sank in. Viola had been controlling the narrative from the very beginning, making sure I felt isolated from my own family during one of the most important times in my life. There's more, Linda said gently. At the wedding reception, I tried to strike up conversations with Michael's family and friends. Most of them were lovely, but there were some interesting comments. What kind of comments? One of Viola's friends mentioned how different you were from what they'd expected from Michael. Another said something about how it was sweet that Michael was willing to take on someone with your background. Linda's jaw tightened. I asked what she meant by that, and she said Viola had mentioned that you didn't have much family, that you'd had a difficult upbringing after losing your parents. My face burned with humiliation. She made me sound like a charity case. That's exactly how she made you sound. Like Michael was being generous by marrying someone so disadvantaged. The pieces were clicking into place with devastating clarity. Viola hadn't just been controlling our wedding planning, she'd been controlling how I was perceived by their entire social circle. She painted me as someone to be pitied rather than celebrated, someone who should be grateful for their acceptance rather than someone who brought value to their family. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I asked. Because what would it have accomplished? You were already married, you seemed to be trying to make things work, and I didn't want to poison your relationship with information about things that had already happened. But after watching what occurred at that restaurant, Linda shook her head. I realized this wasn't just about Viola being controlling. This was about her systematically undermining you from day one. Monday morning, I met with Floyd Brennan as scheduled. His office was in a sleek downtown building, and he was exactly what I'd hoped for: professional, experienced, and direct. He'd responded to my text Sunday morning, confirming a 9 a.m. appointment. I got your message, he said after I signed the initial paperwork. Tell me about your marriage and what's brought you to this decision. I gave him the overview, the constant boundary violations, the way Michael always sided with his mother, the accumulating evidence that I was never truly accepted as part of the family. What was the final straw? David asked. I told him about the dinner, about Viola's deliberate exclusion, about Michael's response when I asked if I was family. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Penny, I'm going to be direct with you. This kind of pattern, where one spouse consistently prioritizes their family of origin over their marital relationship, it's more common than you might think, and it rarely gets better without intensive therapy and genuine commitment to change. Michael mentioned counseling. Are you interested in trying that route? I thought about it for a moment. If Michael had stood up for me even once in 3 years, if he'd ever chosen my feelings over his mother's preferences, if he'd shown any genuine understanding of why that dinner was so hurtful. Maybe. But Robert, when I asked him if I was family, he told me to keep my mouth shut. In front of my aunt, in front of everyone. That tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. Then let's talk about asset division and timeline. The legal process was more complex than I'd anticipated. Robert explained that even in the best circumstances, we were looking at 8 to 12 months minimum due to state waiting periods and mandatory procedures. He's hoping you'll change your mind, Robert explained during one of our meetings. It's a common tactic. The longer he can drag this out, the more opportunities he has to wear you down. With his cooperation, we could finalize this in 8 months. If he contests everything, we could be looking at over a year. That's not going to happen. I believe you. But be prepared for the pressure to intensify. Family members, mutual friends, even casual acquaintances might try to convince you that you're making a mistake, that marriage requires compromise, that you're giving up too easily. He was right. The calls started within a week of my filing the paperwork. First Jessica, then Robert, then several of our mutual friends. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. They were concerned about me, they understood I was hurt, but surely this was an overreaction to what was essentially a misunderstanding. The most infuriating call came from Sandra, a friend from my book club who'd become close to Jessica over the past year. "Penny, I talked to Jessica about what happened, and I really think there might have been some miscommunication," Sandra said. "She said Viola was just trying to be efficient by ordering ahead, and maybe she miscounted or forgot to include you by accident." "Sandra," Viola looked my aunt in the eye and said, "I only ordered for family. There was no miscommunication." "But maybe she meant something different by that. Maybe she just meant she'd ordered for the people she knew the food preferences for?" I felt that familiar frustration, the gaslighting sensation of having people try to convince me that my own experience wasn't valid. "Sandra, let me ask you something. If Tom's mother deliberately excluded you from a family dinner and then announced in front of everyone that she'd only ordered for family, how would you feel?" There was a long pause. I would probably be hurt. "And if Tom told you to keep your mouth shut about it instead of defending you, what would you think about your marriage?" Another pause. "I see your point. I'm not ending my marriage over a dinner misunderstanding. I'm ending it because my husband made it clear that his wife's feelings and dignity matter less to him than avoiding conflict with his mother." The conversation with my college friend Maria was even worse. "Penny, I've been married for 8 years now, and let me tell you, marriage is hard work. There are going to be times when you feel unappreciated, times when your spouse doesn't handle things the way you'd like. But you don't just give up and get divorced every time someone hurts your feelings." "Maria, this wasn't someone hurting my feelings. This was 3 years of systematic exclusion and disrespect, culminating in a public humiliation that my husband actively participated in. But think about what you're throwing away. Michael is a good guy, he has a stable job, he loves you. So his mother is difficult, whose mother-in-law isn't. You learn to deal with it, you set boundaries, you don't let it destroy your marriage. I tried setting boundaries for 3 years. Michael refused to enforce them. Maybe you weren't clear enough about how serious this was for you." I almost hung up on her. "Maria, if your husband needs you to explain why his family should treat you with basic respect, then the problem isn't your communication skills." The worst part was that some of these people were genuinely trying to be helpful. They'd absorbed the cultural message that marriage requires endless compromise from women, that we should accommodate, adjust, and endure rather than expect to be treated as equal partners worthy of respect. But Linda kept me grounded. She'd extended her stay indefinitely, working remotely from Seattle to support me through the divorce process. "You know what I find most telling?" she said one evening as we walked through the park near my temporary apartment. "Not one person who's called to convince you to go back has asked how you're doing. They're all focused on saving your marriage, but none of them have asked if you're happier now, if you're sleeping better, if you feel more like yourself." She was right. I was sleeping better. I'd been having stress-related insomnia for months before that dinner, waking up anxious about upcoming family events, dreading holidays and gatherings where I'd have to navigate Viola's passive-aggressive comments and Michael's dismissive responses to my concerns. "I keep waiting to feel sad about losing Michael, I admit it. Everyone assumes I must be heartbroken, that I'm just putting on a brave face. But honestly, I mostly feel relieved. That tells you everything you need to know about the state of your marriage." The turning point came about 6 weeks after I'd filed for divorce. Michael showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing the expression of someone who expected to be welcomed back with open arms. "I've been thinking about everything," he said when I reluctantly let him in. "About that night at the restaurant, about our marriage, about what went wrong." I sat down across from him, noting that he'd chosen the chair that put him slightly higher than where I was sitting on the couch. Even now, even when he was supposedly apologizing, he was positioning himself as the authority in the conversation. "I think I understand now why you were so upset," he continued. "My mom can be overwhelming, and I know she has strong opinions about how things should be done. Maybe I should have been more supportive of you in that situation." "Maybe?" I said quietly. "Okay, I should have been more supportive. I should have made sure you had food, I should have handled the situation better. But Penny, you have to understand, my mom didn't mean to hurt you. She's not used to having another woman in the family, and she's still learning how to include you. Michael, we've been married for 3 years. How long is this learning period supposed to last? These things take time. Family dynamics are complicated. What about your response when I asked if I was family?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. I was embarrassed. Everyone was staring, you were making a scene, and I just wanted to get through the dinner without more drama. So you told your wife to keep her mouth shut? I asked you not to escalate the situation. By telling me to keep my mouth shut while your mother publicly excluded me from the family. You're twisting what happened. And there it was, the same pattern that had defined our entire marriage. Michael would acknowledge that maybe, possibly, he could have handled something slightly better, but ultimately the problem was my perception, my reaction, my inability to understand the complexities of the situation. Michael, do you think it was appropriate for your mother to deliberately exclude me from that dinner? She didn't deliberately exclude you. She made a mistake. She looked my aunt in the eye and said she'd only ordered for family. She probably just meant she'd ordered for the people she knew would be coming. I'm your wife. She knew I'd be coming. Maybe she thought you'd want to order something different. I stared at him, watching him twist himself into pretzels to avoid admitting that his mother had done something deliberately hurtful. This was the man I'd married, the man who would sacrifice logic and honesty to protect his mother from any criticism. Get out, I said quietly. Penny, please. I love you. I know we can fix this. Michael, you just spent 20 minutes explaining to me why everything that happened was either my fault, my misunderstanding, or an innocent mistake on your mother's part. You haven't once acknowledged that I was actually hurt by something that was actually wrong. If that's your idea of fixing things, we have very different definitions of what a marriage should look like. He left, but not before making one final attempt to regain control. You'll regret this, Penny. You're throwing away a good marriage because you're too proud to forgive and move forward. I locked the door behind him and called Linda. It's over, I said. Really over. I finally understand that he's never going to see what he did wrong because in his mind, he didn't do anything wrong. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Free. The most telling moment came during our one and only counseling session. Michael had insisted on it as a condition for cooperating with the divorce terms. The therapist, Dr. Sarah Green, asked Michael to describe what had happened at the restaurant that night. It was just a misunderstanding, Michael said. My mom forgot to order Penny a meal, and instead of handling it quietly, Penny made this huge scene and embarrassed my whole family. Dr. Green looked at me. Is that your recollection of events? I told her exactly what had happened, Viola's deliberate exclusion, her public announcement that she'd only ordered for family, Michael's response when I asked if I was family, everything. Michael, Dr. Green said carefully, do you see how these might be two very different versions of the same event? Penny tends to be oversensitive about my family, Michael replied. She takes everything personally. That was the moment I knew counseling wouldn't help. He genuinely couldn't see what he'd done wrong. In his mind, I was the problem for having feelings about being publicly excluded and humiliated. The divorce was finalized 10 months later. Michael had tried to contest several aspects, prolonging the process just as Robert had predicted. I kept my maiden name, moved into a small apartment across town, and started rebuilding my life. Linda stayed for 3 months initially, then visited for a week each month until the divorce was final. The aftermath was interesting to watch unfold. Jessica reached out to me about a month after the dinner, wanting to clear the air. We met for coffee, and she spent an hour explaining how I'd misunderstood their family dynamics, how Viola was actually very loving but had specific ways of doing things, how I should have been more patient. So you think it was appropriate for your mother to deliberately exclude me from a family dinner? I asked. She didn't exclude you, Jessica insisted. She just made a mistake with the ordering. A mistake that happened to exclude exactly one person, and that person happened to be the daughter-in-law she's never accepted? Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Look, I just think you gave up too easily. Marriage is hard work. You're right, marriage is hard work. But it's supposed to be work that both people are doing together, not one person working constantly to earn basic respect and inclusion while the other person enables their family to treat their spouse like an outsider. Jessica left that meeting clearly frustrated that she couldn't make me see reason. I never heard from her again. Robert surprised me by sending a card about 6 weeks after the divorce was final. It was simple, just a note saying he was sorry for how things had ended, and that he hoped I was doing well. No excuses, no attempts to minimize what had happened, just an acknowledgement and an apology. It was more than Michael or Viola ever offered. Michael tried to reconnect with me several times over the following months. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, call me at work, even send flowers with notes about how much he missed me. The notes always followed the same pattern. He was sorry things had gotten so out of hand, he missed our life together, he was sure we could work things out if I'd just give him another chance. Never once did he acknowledge what had actually happened that night. Never once did he take responsibility for choosing his mother over his wife. Never once did he recognize that the problem wasn't my reaction to being excluded and humiliated, the problem was the exclusion and humiliation itself. The final contact came about 14 months after our divorce was finalized. Michael called me on what would have been our 5th wedding anniversary. "I've been thinking about our marriage," he said. "About that night at Romano's." For a moment, I thought maybe he'd finally understood. "I think I know what went wrong," he continued. "You were already looking for a reason to leave, weren't you? That's why you overreacted so much to what was basically just a seating mix-up. You wanted out of our marriage, and you used that dinner as an excuse." I hung up on him. That was the last time we spoke. Here's what I learned from that experience: some people will never understand that their behavior is the problem. They'll twist themselves into pretzels to avoid taking responsibility, to avoid seeing how their actions hurt others. Michael genuinely believed that the problem was my reaction to being excluded, not the exclusion itself. Viola probably still tells people that her ungrateful daughter-in-law destroyed the family over a simple misunderstanding about dinner. But here's what else I learned: sometimes the most devastating truths come wrapped in the most innocent questions. When my aunt asked why I didn't get a steak or dessert, she wasn't trying to cause trouble. She was asking an obvious question about an obviously wrong situation. And Viola's response, "I only ordered for family," revealed everything I needed to know about my place in that family and my husband's priorities. That innocent question cracked open the facade I'd been living behind for 3 years. It forced everyone at that table to confront what they'd all been pretending not to see: that I'd never been truly accepted, never been considered real family, never been worth defending. And my own question, am I family or not, wasn't really about whether Viola considered me family. It was about whether Michael did. His response told me everything I needed to know. The most devastating truth of all wasn't that my mother-in-law didn't like me. It wasn't even that she deliberately excluded me from family gatherings and decisions. The most devastating truth was that my husband was perfectly fine with all of it, as long as it didn't inconvenience him or create conflict with his mother. Nearly 2 years after our divorce, I started dating again. I met James at a book club meeting. He's kind, thoughtful, and has a wonderful relationship with his family, the kind of relationship where they welcome newcomers warmly and genuinely. When James took me to meet his parents for the first time, his mother had prepared my favorite dessert after asking James what I might like. His father asked about my job, my interests, my family, because he wanted to get to know me. At their family dinners, there are always enough place settings. Always enough food. Always room for everyone who wants to be there. That's what family actually looks like. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled that dinner differently. What if I'd quietly asked Jason to bring me a menu so I could order my own meal? What if I'd laughed it off and pretended it didn't hurt? What if I'd pulled Michael aside privately later to discuss how excluded I'd felt? But then I remember, I'd been handling things differently for 3 years. I'd been quietly tolerating, privately discussing, diplomatically approaching every slight and exclusion and humiliation. And it had gotten me exactly nowhere except more isolated and more disrespected. That night at Romano's, Linda's simple question forced everyone to stop pretending. It made the invisible visible. It turned the unspoken into the spoken. And my response, finally standing up for myself after years of being told to keep quiet, wasn't an overreaction. It was the appropriate reaction to inappropriate behavior. I'm grateful for that dinner now, as painful as it was. It showed me who these people really were when they couldn't hide behind politeness and social expectations. It showed me what my marriage really was underneath all the promises and excuses. Most importantly, it showed me what I was worth. I was worth more than being excluded and humiliated. I was worth more than a husband who would tell me to keep my mouth shut while his family mistreated me. I was worth more than begging for basic respect and inclusion from people who had already decided I wasn't worthy of either. The table fell silent that night when I said what no one expected, that I agreed with Viola, that she did know what was best for her family, and what was best was for me not to be in it. But the real truth that no one expected was simpler: I finally knew what was best for me too. And that was everything I needed to build a better life.